It was August 7th, 2019, a day that promised to be like any other in the sleepy town of Springfield, Ohio. Located in the Midwest of the United States, Springfield was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone and big events were rare. People led simple lives, and the calm pace of the place meant that any news spread quickly. That sultry summer, the gossip taking over the streets was the unlikely romance between Michael Dawson and Rebecca Harris. Michael, a young man of just 19 years old, was known by everyone in the city as a quiet boy with no great ambitions. He had worked at an auto repair shop since finishing high school and lived with his mother in a modest house on the outskirts of Springfield. No one could have imagined that he would end up in a relationship with Rebecca Harris, a rich and influential widow, 46 years his senior. Rebecca was a respected figure in the town. At 65, she had been widowed nearly a decade ago following the death of her husband, George Harris, a local businessman who built a fortune from a supermarket chain. Despite her age, Rebecca was always a vain and young-spirited woman, but her strong temper was known to everyone. She lived alone in a huge mansion in the city center and was often seen at social and charity events. The relationship between Michael and Rebecca began unexpectedly. They met by chance at a local cafe where Michael was repairing kitchen machines. Rebecca, who frequented the cafe daily, was the one who took the first step. Casual conversations soon turned into more frequent meetings, and before the town knew it, they were inseparable. It didn't take long for rumors to start spreading. People whispered in markets, churches, and squares. Many said Michael was only interested in Rebecca's money, while others believed she took advantage of his naivety. But for them, gossip didn't matter. Rebecca was determined to move forward with the marriage, and Michael seemed to be genuinely involved, ignoring the criticism. Shortly after publicly assuming their relationship, the marriage was announced, shocking the residents of Springfield even more. The big day has finally arrived. The ceremony was held in the town's small, elegant chapel, a place where many generations of Springfield had said their vows. However, Michael and Rebecca's wedding was unlike any the town had ever seen. Inside the chapel, an unusual mix of guests was present. On one side, Rebecca's friends, all well-dressed, most around her age. On the other, few of Michael's friends and family, uncomfortable and clearly out of place in that situation. Michael looked nervous but smiling. He was dressed in a simple suit, perhaps the only one he owned. Rebecca, on the other hand, shined in an elegant and expensive white dress, as if to show the city that despite her age, she could still turn heads. When the two said yes before the altar, the discreet murmur of the guests was inevitable. There was tension in the air, but no one seemed willing to talk openly about it. However, the most disconcerting moment of the day was the arrival of Peter Harris, Rebecca's ex-husband. No one knew Peter was still in town, and his presence brought a wave of unease to the ceremony. Peter and Rebecca had been divorced almost 20 years ago, but the two never had a good separation. He had always been a jealous and possessive man, and many said that their marriage had ended because of Peter's constant episodes of jealousy and control. Peter entered the chapel discreetly, but his presence did not go unnoticed. He stood at the back of the church, watching everything from afar. His dark eyes followed Rebecca and Michael's every movement, as if he was keeping every detail of that moment in mind. He didn't speak to anyone, he didn't make any moves. It just sat there, a silent shadow in the background of the ceremony. After the wedding, the reception was held at Rebecca's mansion, where guests were treated to a lavish party. There was fine food, live music, and extravagant decorations. But once again, Peter's presence hung like a cloud over the event. He showed up at the reception, but didn't mingle with the other guests. He stood in the shadows, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching Rebecca and Michael from afar with an unreadable expression on his face. As the night progressed, the tension increased. Some guests began to leave earlier than expected, uncomfortable with the heavy atmosphere surrounding the event. Michael and Rebecca, however, seemed oblivious to all of this. They were focused on each other, smiling and enjoying the night, as if nothing could shake their newfound happiness. But behind the scenes, there was a feeling that something was wrong. People quietly whispered about Peter's behavior, and wondered why he was there. Some speculated that he wasn't over the divorce, while others suspected he might be up to something. What no one knew that night was that, within hours, the happiness of this unlikely couple would be destroyed forever, and the city of Springfield would never be the same. Michael and Rebecca's wedding was just the beginning of a tragedy that would soon shock the entire town. On the morning of August 8th, 2019, Springfield woke up to a typical calm. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, bathing the city in a soft, golden light. On the streets, traffic was sparse, and residents slowly began their daily routine. For many, Michael Dawson and Rebecca Harris's wedding the night before was still the main topic of conversation. Speculation about the unusual relationship continued to rage on every corner of the city, but no one could predict what was about to happen. Around 7:30 a.m., the tranquility of that morning was brutally interrupted when a desperate call was made to 911. Rebecca Harris's trembling voice pleaded for help on the other end of the line. "Please send someone quickly. He's dead," she screamed, her voice thick with panic. 911 dispatchers tried to calm her, but Rebecca could barely speak, sobbing uncontrollably. When the police arrived at Rebecca's mansion, in the heart of Springfield, they found a scene of pure horror. The large house, which the night before had been filled with guests celebrating the wedding, now seemed a gloomy and desolate scene. The front door was ajar, and inside, there was an eerie silence, except for Rebecca's sobs, which came from upstairs. Downstairs, in the living room, lay the body of Michael Dawson. He was lying face down in a pool of blood that had already begun to clot. There were several stab wounds to his chest and back, evidence of a violent and desperate death. The scene was chaotic. Overturned furniture, broken vases, and bloodstains on the walls indicated a fierce struggle. However, no one else was in the house other than Rebecca. Officers rushed upstairs and found Rebecca in the master bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a tear-soaked tissue. She looked completely dazed, her eyes swollen and red. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and she repeated in a whisper, "I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened." Springfield detectives were called to the scene to begin the investigation. Detective Tom Bennett, a veteran of the local police force, led the team. He was an experienced man, known for his patience and attention to detail. Upon entering the house, Tom immediately felt the weight of the tragedy that had befallen that family. He walked slowly through the crime scene, examining every detail, trying to reconstruct what could have happened that night. Early evidence indicated that Michael had been attacked in the living room, probably by someone he knew, as there were no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked when the police arrived, and the only key was in Rebecca's possession. Detective Bennett noticed that despite the violence of the crime, Rebecca showed no injuries or signs of struggle, which raised his first doubts. While the forensic team examined Michael's body and collected evidence, Detective Bennett focused on interrogating Rebecca. He knew that in the emotional state she was in, getting accurate information would be difficult, but he had to try. "Mrs. Harris, can you tell us what happened?" he asked, his voice low and calm, trying not to scare her further. Rebecca looked up with her swollen eyes and whispered, I don't know, Detective. I woke up and he was already like that. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. Just when I went downstairs, he was already dead." His words were filled with shock, but Detective Bennett knew something wasn't right. He'd seen this kind of reaction before, a mix of genuine confusion and perhaps fear of revealing something he'd been hiding. Investigators continued to search the home for clues. They found bloody footprints leading from the room to the hallway, but they mysteriously disappeared before reaching any exit. The knife used in the crime, a sharp kitchen blade, was lying on the floor next to Michael's body. The fingerprints on the knife were partially blurred, making it difficult to immediately identify who wielded it. Meanwhile, news of the murder quickly spread throughout Springfield. Shock took over the city. Everyone was in disbelief. Young Michael, who had just gotten married, was now brutally dead, less than 24 hours after he exchanged vows with Rebecca. The town, which had previously only whispered about their unusual relationship, was now plunged into a terrible mystery. But what really piqued everyone's curiosity was the presence of Peter Harris, Rebecca's ex-husband, at the wedding the night before. The entire town knew that their divorce had been turbulent and that Peter never fully accepted the end of the relationship. Furthermore, he had been seen at the reception, watching everything from afar with a cold and disturbing expression. Detective Bennett also couldn't ignore the obvious connection. Although Peter had not yet been officially considered a suspect, he became the focus of the investigation. The detective knew he needed to find him to interrogate him as quickly as possible. Witnesses reported that Peter was seen leaving the reception the night before, just before all the guests left, and no one was sure where he had gone after that. While Rebecca was taken to the local hospital to be treated for shock, Detective Bennett and his team began the hunt for Peter Harris. They knew that in cases like this, time was crucial. The mystery surrounding Michael's death grew thicker and thicker, and every minute that passed without answers increased the tension in the city. That morning, Springfield woke up not just to a new day, but to a nightmare. The young groom was dead, his wife was devastated, and the jealous ex-husband hung like a dark shadow over the case. Everyone in town was wondering, who killed Michael Dawson and why? August 9th, 2019 began with a tense atmosphere in Springfield. News of Michael Dawson's murder spread like wildfire, leaving the small town shaken. People gathered in cafes, markets, and street corners, exchanging theories and rumors about what could have happened. But deep down, most believed the answer to the mystery lay in Peter Harris, Rebecca's ex-husband. Detective Tom Bennett was at the center of this storm. He had spent the night reviewing early crime scene reports and discussing the investigation with his team. The questions seemed endless. How had Michael, a young man with no known enemies, ended up killed in such a brutal way? And why did Peter, after so many years away, reappear exactly on his wedding day? To Bennett, none of this seemed coincidental. At 9 a.m., Detective Bennett received important information. Peter Harris had been located in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. He had checked in there on his wedding day and, according to the manager, spent the night alone in his room without making any contact with other guests. The detective immediately ordered a team to the motel to take Peter in for questioning. When the police arrived at the motel, Peter did not resist. He seemed to be waiting for them. Calmly, he surrendered without creating any problems, but his expression remained cold and distant. It was as if he was prepared for what was to come. When he arrived at the police station, he was taken directly to the interrogation room, where Detective Bennett was waiting for him. Peter sat at the table, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, almost challenging. Detective Bennett started slowly, trying to get Peter to relax and reveal something that could help the case. "Peter," the detective began, "we know you were at the wedding. We can start with that. Why did you decide to show up after so long?" Peter smiled bitterly. "I had a right to be there, Tom. Even after our divorce, Rebecca and I had a past. That never goes away, does it?" The detective nodded. He knew that the divorce between Peter and Rebecca had been messy, with lots of fights and disputes. But showing up on her wedding day with a much younger man, it's not something anyone would do, right? Especially someone who had such a complicated relationship with her. Peter shook his head, looking at the floor before responding. "Rebecca always knew how to provoke me, Bennett. She knew it would get to me. She wanted me to see. Maybe she wanted to humiliate me, or maybe she just wanted to show me that she could move on. But I didn't come to cause trouble." Detective Bennett kept his gaze steady on Peter, trying to catch any flaws in his words. "What about last night? You were seen leaving reception early. Can you tell us where you were after that?" Peter took a deep breath, crossing his arms again. "I went back to my motel room. I was tired, and honestly, I didn't want to keep watching that. I had a few drinks and slept. When I woke up this morning, the cops were there." Although Peter's response seemed coherent, Bennett knew he needed more than words. He ordered a team to go to the motel to look for any evidence that corroborated Peter's story. Meanwhile, the interrogation continued. "Peter, do you have any idea who might want to hurt Michael? Someone who wasn't happy with their relationship?" the detective asked. Peter's gaze remained distant for a moment before he responded. "Michael was a kid. I don't know much about him other than what people said. But if someone killed him, it was because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rebecca, She always had a way of inviting trouble. Maybe it finally caught up with her. The detective noticed a slight bitterness in Peter's words, but he didn't have enough evidence to press him further. So, he decided to focus on another line of investigation. As Peter's interrogation continued, another police team was looking into Rebecca's background. Although she was a respected figure in the town, reports emerged that her previous marriage to Peter had been marked by numerous betrayals and violent fights. Sources close to the couple described Peter as a controlling and jealous man, which further fueled suspicions against him. However, investigations also began to reveal a hidden side of Rebecca. Detective Bennett discovered that after the death of her first husband, Rebecca inherited a considerable fortune, which allowed her to live very comfortably. However, the wealthy widow also had debts and was facing more recent financial problems, although this was never discussed publicly. Furthermore, rumors arose about her relationship with Michael. Some people began to suggest that the marriage might have been a front for something darker, perhaps a scheme to protect Rebecca's money. Michael could have been a pawn in a larger game, and his death could have been the result of a miscalculated plot. As Detective Bennett tried to connect the pieces, Michael's autopsy was completed. The results confirmed that he had been stabbed multiple times, probably by someone who had a strong emotional motivation. The struggle marks on his hands indicated that he had desperately tried to defend himself, which made the detective believe that the killer knew the victim and was in a direct confrontation with her. Although the evidence began to point to Peter, nothing was conclusive enough to arrest him. The fingerprints on the knife were too smudged to identify, and the only witness, Rebecca, continued to claim she didn't know what had happened. However, something about Rebecca's behavior was starting to bother Detective Bennett. Although she was visibly shaken, her story didn't change, a rigidity the detective had seen in cases where witnesses were hiding something. Deciding to dig deeper, Bennett began to investigate the relationship between Rebecca and Michael more closely, believing that the key to unraveling this crime could lie in secrets they both kept. The mystery of Springfield was just beginning to unfold, and with each new revelation, it became clear that there was much more behind Michael Dawson's death than anyone in town could imagine. The days after Michael Dawson's murder were pure tension for Springfield. Questions about what really happened that night never left the residents' minds. And as the investigation progressed, the layers of secrets surrounding the case began to be unveiled. Detective Tom Bennett, under pressure from both the media and the local population, knew he couldn't let the case go cold. He was convinced that there was something much darker going on than a simple crime of passion. But the pieces of the puzzle still didn't fit perfectly. On the morning of August 12, 2019, something new happened. A woman entered the police station, visibly nervous and hesitant. She identified herself as Karen Davis, an old friend of Rebecca's, and asked to speak to Detective Bennett. When she was finally taken to the interrogation room, her trembling voice indicated that something important was about to be revealed. "I don't know if I should be here, but I can't stay silent anymore," Karen began as she looked around, as if she feared she was being watched. "I knew Rebecca for many years. We were close, until just before her marriage to Michael. Something started to change in her, and I think you need to know what I discovered." Detective Bennett was attentive. He knew that these types of visits often led to important clues. "Karen, if you know something that could help the investigation, now is the time to speak up," he said, encouraging her to continue. Karen took a deep breath. Rebecca, she was desperate, much more than people realize. She was deep in debt. The house she lived in, mortgaged. The lifestyle she maintained, all supported by loans. She had nothing left, but there was a life insurance policy. Bennett raised his eyebrow. "A life insurance policy? Whose?" "From Michael," Karen replied, her voice becoming increasingly tense. "A few days before the wedding, Rebecca told me that she had Michael take out a life insurance policy in which she was the beneficiary. And that policy was for a very large amount, something that would solve all of her financial problems." The detective began to put the pieces together. "Are you saying that Rebecca had a financial reason to marry Michael, and then he ends up dead?" Karen nodded. "I don't want to believe she would do that. But after the wedding, Rebecca changed. She seemed relieved, like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I tried to move away from her after that. Something was wrong. I could feel it." Karen's revelations have Detective Bennett on high alert. Now, there was a clear financial motive tied to Michael's death. But there was still one crucial part missing. Who had carried out the murder? And where did Peter Harris fit into this plot? The next day, the detective decided to confront Rebecca with the new information. She was called to the police station once again, this time with her lawyer present. When Detective Bennett entered the interrogation room, the atmosphere was heavy. Rebecca sat with shaking hands, clearly nervous about what came next. Rebecca, the detective began bluntly, "We know about the life insurance policy, and we know that you were facing serious financial problems before you married Michael. I want you to tell me the truth now. This was all planned." Rebecca was silent for a few seconds, and then looked directly at Bennett, her words filled with restrained emotion. "I would never hurt Michael. He loved me, and I loved the security he provided me. But I swear I never wanted that to happen." The detective did not allow himself to be carried away by her emotions. He kept pushing, "But you knew about the policy, and you knew that with his death, all your financial problems would disappear." Rebecca swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. "I was desperate, yes. I was losing everything, but that doesn't mean I killed him. Maybe someone found out about the policy. Maybe someone used it against me. But it wasn't me." Bennett was silent for a moment, watching her every move. Rebecca looked like a woman on the verge of collapse, but she still maintained her version of events. And then, the detective remembered Peter Harris, the ex-husband who had reappeared in Rebecca's life at exactly the right time. Peter was called in for further questioning, this time with new evidence about the life insurance policy. When Detective Bennett confronted him, Peter remained calm, but there was a growing tension in the air. "Did you know about the insurance policy, Peter?" Bennett asked, watching her ex-husband's reactions. Peter looked directly at Bennett, his eyes cold and calculating. "Of course I knew," he said, without any hesitation. "Rebecca told me, of course. She thought she was opening up to me, just like old times. But I never thought she would go that far." The detective approached. "And where were you the night of the murder, Peter? Did this talk about the past rekindle something in you?" Peter smiled, but his smile was empty. "I was at the motel, like I said. And no, detective, I didn't kill her. But honestly, if someone else had, I would understand why." The tension in the room was palpable. Peter was playing a dangerous game, but there still wasn't enough evidence to directly connect him to the murder. And as Bennett tried to find the last piece of the puzzle, a new twist happened. A DNA test revealed something shocking. Traces of skin under Michael's fingernails belonged to a third individual, someone who had not yet been identified. The police began searching intensely for this person, believing that the final truth about Michael Dawson's murder could be in the hands of someone unexpected. As Springfield tried to return to normal, Detective Bennett knew the mystery was far from solved. There were hidden truths, secrets that had not yet been revealed, and one last move that could finally expose the killer. But for now, the case remained a tangle of lies, betrayal, and suspicion. And the only certainty that remained was that, in Springfield, not everything was as it seemed.